Hello there everybody, I hope you're having a great day. In today's video, I wanted to talk about the rule of two. But because there have been many videos about the rule of two, I wanted to do something a little different. In today's video, we're going to be talking about some of the pros and some of the cons of the rule of two. We'll be talking about the amazing qualities of this system, as well as some of the ways the rule of two may have harmed the Sith. But before talking about the pros and cons of the rule of two, let's briefly explain what the rule of two is. Darth Bane's rule of two is the idea that there should only ever be two Sith, a master and an apprentice, one to embody power and one to crave it. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of the rule of two. The first pro is that this system would cause Sith to become more powerful, at least theoretically. So how does that work? Well, when Bane joined the Sith, who were known as the Brotherhood of Darkness, he disagreed with the way things were run. Lord Khan, who was in charge of the Brotherhood of Darkness, wanted to make all members equal. They were all lords of the Sith and were all equal, or so Lord Khan claimed. This didn't sit well with Bane. Before Lord Khan rose to power, Sith would often be pitted against each other, rival against rival, master versus apprentice. Many Sith killed their masters to show that they had become more powerful. However, when Khan came to power, this was no longer the case. All were considered equal, in order to have as many Sith members as possible. Bane believed that this was foolish and went against how the Sith Order should be run. In Bane's opinion, the strong were meant to rule the weak. So how exactly did the rule of two make Sith stronger? Well, rather than have a large group of Sith that were all considered equal, despite the fact that some were obviously more powerful than others, Bane orchestrated things so that the Master would be the most powerful Sith alive. The Master would have all the knowledge of the Sith, and slowly, over time, they would teach their apprentice everything they know. Eventually, when their apprentice felt like they knew everything that their Master could teach them, they would challenge their Master to a duel. If they won, they would become the new Master. They would have to find a new apprentice whom they would instruct, and the cycle would continue. Now, the idea was in order for an apprentice to defeat their Master, they would have to be more powerful than their Master. That means that over time, the Sith would become more powerful. In theory, every Sith would be more powerful than the last. Seems like a pretty smart system. Now, another pro is the fact that it was much easier to hide the Sith from the Jedi, now that there were only two. Sure, it was difficult to hide at times, but two Sith are much harder to find than an entire army or order. In hiding, the Sith could train, grow stronger, and set up a network in the underworld and with different corporations that would eventually help them take over the galaxy. There wasn't the constant, endless struggle between Jedi and Sith. The rule of two would ensure that the Sith would eventually take over without pointless struggle. Now, the last pro on our list is that the rule of two stopped the Sith from destroying themselves. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but the Sith would constantly kill each other and fight amongst themselves. Although Bane liked the idea of a master and an apprentice fighting to determine who is more powerful, the fact that many Sith were fighting amongst themselves often weakened them. There were countless times during the new Sith Wars that the Republic was frail and an easy target for the Sith to conquer. However, every Sith wanted to rule. Rather than attacking Coruscant when it was weak, they would stab each other in the back. Khan attempted to stop this by saying that all were equal. However, they became much like Jedi, too numerous and much harder for Khan to control. In Bane's opinion, this is why they were nearly destroyed, and why Bane decided to destroy them and create the rule of two. Now, a lot of videos might have ended there, but I wanted to talk about some of the flaws in the rule of two, some of which caused problems for the Sith down the line. Now, the first con in the rule of two was its numbers. Now, I know I recently just explained how having two Sith was incredibly beneficial. However, limiting the number to two made it incredibly difficult to fight a larger number of people. Just to give an example of this, about 10 years after Bane started the rule of two, Darth Bane and his apprentice were attacked by 4 Jedi. The battle nearly killed them. Granted, most of the Jedi were incredibly skilled. However, imagine if the Jedi Order had brought 10 Jedi, or even 20. No matter how skilled the two Sith were, they wouldn't be able to fight that many and would be destroyed. This is part of the reason that the future Sith Masters, such as Tenebrous, had other apprentices and servants of the dark side. The second con is that the Sith may not become stronger over time like Bane predicted. Now, in theory, Bane's idea made a lot of sense. In order for an apprentice to defeat their master, they would have to become more powerful than their master. The potential problem that you could run into is that you would eventually have a Sith master who's too strong in the Force for their apprentice to defeat. What if The Sith Master was the most powerful being in the galaxy, and no apprentice that they trained could defeat them. It sort of defeats the whole purpose of the Rule of Two. This sort of happened with Palpatine. Palpatine was incredibly strong in the Force, and neither Maul, nor Dooku, or even Vader, because of his injuries, ever became more powerful than Palpatine. Now, granted, Vader did eventually kill Palpatine, but that was because Palpatine was distracted, and not because he had grown stronger in the Force than Palpatine like Bane wanted. Now, the third and last flaw with the Rule of Two that I'm going to talk about is that there's a really good chance that one of the Sith in the Rule of Two could come to hate the Rule of Two and destroy it, leaving the Sith completely destroyed. Now, this actually happened several times. The first time it happened was with a Sith called Darth Millennial, a three-eyed mutant. He came to hate the Rule of Two, believing that Darth Khan's version of the Sith made more sense. So he left his master and started his own cult of followers that lasted for centuries. Another example of this is a Sith master named Darth Gravid. Now, while Darth Gravid followed the Rule of Two for most of his life, he eventually began to believe that being fully committed to the dark side wasn't the best way to go about things, and eventually began to lose his sanity. He attempted to destroy all knowledge of the Sith that had been collected over half a millennia. Thankfully for the Sith, he was stopped and killed by his Twi'lek apprentice, who nearly died in the process. See how close the Sith became to being completely wiped out because they only had 2 members? Only having 2 members was incredibly risky. Now, in conclusion, the Rule of Two is honestly a pretty solid system. In my opinion, it's undoubtedly better than how the Sith ran things in the Brotherhood of Darkness. The way the Sith ran things before Bane would have potentially destroyed them. Also, like Bane had hoped for, the Rule of Two definitely made the Sith more powerful than they had before. Each Sith became more powerful than the last and eventually led to Darth Sidious and the collapse of the Republic. But it was not without its flaws. In my opinion, the Rule of Two's biggest strength was also its biggest weakness. Limiting its numbers to 2 was incredibly beneficial, but also incredibly risky. Anyway, what are your guys' thoughts on the Rule of Two? Thank you all so much for watching. May the Force be with you all.